Warm rubber hangs in the air of a 1920s AKRON tire room, and you are standing where the tire mold trimmer begins his long shift, near the benches where dull knives, damp rags, and blackened scraps wait in the yellow light. There is no hurry here, only the slow rhythm of work and the steady sense that the day will be measured in small cuts, careful hands, and the soft drag of rubber against wood and metal. You can feel the floor before you notice much else, because it has the tired give of an old factory floor, worn smooth by boots, carts, and the patient shuffle of men who have walked the same path for years. Somewhere above you, belts turn with a low, leathered slap, and the wide windows along the brick wall catch the grey Ohio morning before it has fully made up its mind. This is Akron in the 1920s, a city wrapped in steam, soot, rubber dust, and ambition, and the tire mold trimmer belongs to one of its quieter corners. The city outside is already awake, though not loudly, not yet. Street cars move along wet tracks with a hollow ringing sound, and workers come in from boarding houses, family kitchens, rented rooms, and narrow streets where coal smoke hangs just below the roofs. You come in with them, carrying the chill of the morning in your coat and the smell of breakfast coffee still faintly on your hands. The factory receives you without ceremony, as factories usually do, with a punch clock, a hook for your coat, and the plain expectation that your hands will know what to do. For a tire mold trimmer, the day is not heroic, and it isn't the kind of work that appears in polished advertisements showing strong rubber, smooth roads, and cars sailing through clean countryside. Your place is after the great heat and pressure have done their work, after rubber has been pressed into shape, cured into something durable, and taken from the molds with its edges imperfect, its seams feathered, its little vents leaving stray whiskers and nubs. The tire is nearly finished, but not quite, and that small distance between nearly and ready belongs to you. You stand at the bench, and the bench has its own familiar geography. There are grooves where blades have slipped too often, dark stains from oil and rubber, and small piles of trimmed flash that curl like black shavings from a carpenter's plane. The knife in your hand is not elegant, though it has been sharpened more times than anyone has counted, and the handle has absorbed sweat until it feels almost personal. It fits your palm because the hand has given itself to it day after day, until tool and worker have settled into a quiet agreement. The first tire is set down with a soft, heavy thump. It smells of hot rubber, sulfur, talc, and the faint mineral sharpness of carbon black. And when you lean close, the warmth still rises from it, like breath from an animal at rest. You turn it slowly, looking for the seam where the mold came together, and for the thin raised line that must be sliced away. The work begins not with force, but with attention, because too shallow a cut leaves a ragged ridge, while too deep a cut scars the tire and invites the foreman's look. So you draw the blade along the seam. The motion is small, but it asks for care, and the rubber gives way with a soft, resistant whisper. A black ribbon comes loose beneath your fingers, warm and slightly tacky, and it folds over itself on the bench like something tired. You turn the tire again. You follow the line. You keep your wrist steady while the room hums around you, and already the day is finding its shape. In Akron, in the 1920s, the tire business was fast, crowded, and hungry. But your little station moved according to a slower law. Automobiles were spreading across American roads, and companies wanted tires by the thousands, by the tens of thousands, by numbers that sounded too large for one tired pair of hands. Yet every tire still passed through moments like this, when a person looked at an edge, judged it by eye, and made it clean enough to leave the building. The factory wanted speed, but the work demanded touch, and between those two wishes your body spent the day. By the first hour, your shoulders have settled forward in the way they always do, and your thumb has found the same worn spot on the handle. You don't need to think about every motion, though you can't stop thinking entirely. The blade must be guided, the seam must be followed, the raised flash must be removed without gouging the sidewall, and the little rubber spews from vent holes must be shaved close enough that the tire looks neat. It is repetitive work, but it isn't mindless, because rubber has moods, and molds have habits, and some tires come to you with clean edges, while others arrive stubborn and uneven. The factory has its own weather. Near the curing presses and molds, the air is warm and damp, with the thick smell of heated rubber clinging to your shirt, while near the doors, a cold draft slides in whenever someone pushes through from the yard. You feel both at once, heat on your face, chill at your ankles, and the mixture becomes part of the morning. The lamps make small yellow pools over the benches. Dust settles on the windows. A cartwheel squeaks at the same place each time it passes, as though even the wheel has been assigned its narrow duty. You learn to listen without looking up. A heavy tread lands on the floor beside you, and you know another batch has arrived. A foreman clears his throat near the aisle, and half the room straightens without being told. Somewhere a man coughs, another man laughs quietly, and someone curses under his breath when a blade bites too close to his thumb. The noises come and go, but the trimming continues, because the line of tires doesn't pause for very long. The bad part isn't only that the work is hard. Many jobs are hard, and the people of Akron know that, without needing a speech made of it. What makes it wear on you is the closeness of the effort, the way the same careful strain gathers in the same muscles hour after hour, until your wrist feels packed with sand and your eyes begin to blur at the edge of each black seam. The tire in front of you is always different, but it is also always the same, and the sameness is where the day becomes heavy. Still, there is a modest satisfaction in a clean pass of the knife. You can see it, you can feel it. The ragged lip is there, then it is gone, and beneath it the tire looks finished in a way it didn't a moment before. No customer will know your name, and no driver on a country road will think of your bench, but the smoothness of that edge carries a small trace of your care. In quiet work, that is sometimes enough to keep the hands moving. As the morning deepens and the high windows turn from grey to pale white, we move with you from the first fresh tires of the shift into the thicker rhythm of the room, where the work stops feeling new and begins to settle into the body. The Akron tire mold trimmer works in a place built for production, and you feel that purpose in every surface, from the brick walls that hold the heat to the iron carts that bring the cured tires in steady loads. The factory isn't graceful, but it is organized in the stern way of useful places. Rubber is mixed, rolled, built, pressed, cured, inspected, and finished. And you are one of the finishing hands, near enough to the end that every blemish seems to announce itself under the lamp. You stand where small faults are made smaller, where roughness is reduced, where the tire becomes presentable. On the bench beside you, the tools look plain enough to be forgotten. A trimming knife with a short blade, a whetstone darkened with oil, a scraper, a rag that began the morning as grey cotton and will end it almost black. Sometimes there are scissors for narrow bits, or a little rasp for awkward places, but mostly it is the knife and the hand and the eye and the tire, turning slowly before you. The simplicity is part of why the job can fool people. They see a man cutting rubber and think it must be easy, because the motion itself is small. But you know the weight of repetition. A single tire doesn't ask much, but a day of them asks a great deal, because the wrist turns, the thumb presses, the shoulder braces, and the back leans forward in the same patient bow. You cut a seam, lift a shaving, turn the tire, find a ridge, cut again, and then you look for the small, thin stems that the mold vents have left behind. They stand up like stiff whiskers, and if you leave them too long, the tire looks careless. If you trim too close in the wrong place, the mark remains. The rubber is not always soft in the same way. Some pieces still carry warmth from curing and shave with a thick, smooth drag, while others have cooled enough to resist the blade with a dull tug. On a damp day, everything feels slightly sticky. In winter, when the cold comes in under doors and through brick seams, your fingers can stiffen before the first hour is done, even while the air near the curing area remains heavy and hot. The factory teaches you that comfort can be uneven, and that a man may sweat and shiver in the same morning. The smell settles into you. It is not simply rubber, though people outside the plant might call it that and be done with it. It is rubber warmed by pressure, sulfur used in curing, carbon black in fine dark breath, oil from machines, soap from washed hands, steam from pipes, and old wool coats drying near the hooks. You carry it home in your cuffs. It enters the boards of the boarding room, the kitchen chair, the pillowcase, and after a while you may stop noticing it until someone from outside the rubber district tells you that Akron itself smells like tires. You learn the molds by their marks. A mold that closes cleanly leaves a thinner seam, while one that is worn or slightly misaligned leaves a thicker flash that has to be coaxed away. The old molds have their own fingerprints, and so do the men who handled them before you. You begin to see stories in the faults, not dramatic stories, just the small record of pressure, heat, haste, and metal. A little ridge near the shoulder of the tire may tell you that the mold halves didn't meet quite cleanly. A rough patch may tell you the rubber flowed unevenly. A stubborn nub may tell you a vent did its work too well. This knowledge is quiet, and it rarely earns praise. It lives in the hand before it reaches words. If someone asks what you're looking for, you might say, just the seam, or just the rough places, because there is no simple way to explain the hundreds of tiny judgments that happen while the tire turns. Your eye notices what it is being trained to notice. Your hand moves before the thought becomes clear, and the work continues with a calm that can look like boredom from a distance. There are moments when the room seems to narrow to the size of the bench. The black curve of the tire fills your view, and everything else becomes a softened surround. Belts turning above, carts passing behind, a voice calling a number, a door thudding shut. Your knife makes its little sound. The trimmed strip falls away. You rub the edge with your thumb to feel whether it is smooth enough, and the surface gives back a faint warmth, a faint drag, a faint confirmation that the pass was clean. The piece that comes away has no future. It drops into the scrap pile with all the other slivers and curls, bits of a process that has no place on the finished tire. By noon, the pile may look like a nest made of black ribbons, dull, twisted, and faintly shiny where the blade has cut. You brush it aside with the back of your hand. It clings for a moment and falls. The bench clears just enough for the next tire. This is part of why the job can feel thankless. You spend your day removing what should not be seen, and when you do it well, the evidence of your labor disappears. A poorly trimmed tire announces you at once, but a well-trimmed one says nothing. Its silence is the proof. You come to understand that some work is like that, and not only in factories. Some hands make things noticeable, while other hands make them quietly right. And as the factory bell moves the morning toward its middle hour, we stay beside the Akron tire mold trimmer, while the body grows accustomed to the strain, and the smaller discomforts of the job begin to make themselves known. By late morning, the air has thickened, and the Akron tire mold trimmer has begun to feel the day through the small complaints of the body. Your fingers are dark along the creases, even if you washed before the shift. Your nails carry a black rim that ordinary soap will not hurry away. The handle of the knife warms in your palm, and the place where your thumb presses has grown tender, not sharply painful, but present in the steady way of work that repeats itself. The room has become familiar enough to fade, yet close enough to press on you. You shift your feet when you can. The floor is hard, and the soles of your shoes are already carrying the shape of the morning. Some trimmers stand most of the day, bracing the tire against the bench, while others find a low stool for certain tasks, though even sitting doesn't quite let the back rest. The tire must be turned, lifted, steadied, inspected and shifted again, and the body never finds a position it can keep for long. You become a small machine of adjustments, leaning, turning, rising, bending, and returning always to the edge. The knife is the center of the work, but it is also the thing that keeps you watchful. A dull blade pulls and tears, and a sharp blade slips too willingly if your attention loosens. Small cuts are part of the life of the bench. They appear across knuckles and thumbs, wrapped for a while in cloth, reopened when work begins again, darkened by rubber dust before the day is over. You don't make a fuss about them, because no one around you has hands without marks, but you know each little line. The hands remember. There are worse hazards elsewhere in a tire plant, near the heavy machines, the mixing mills, the hot presses, and the places where heat and moving parts deserve a wider respect. Your job may look safer by comparison, and in certain ways it is, but it has its own quiet wearing down. The eyes tire from following black on black. The wrist aches from controlling pressure. The shoulders grow tight from leaning into work that seems too small to justify such fatigue. By the end of the week, the pain may feel less like an event and more like weather. You learn to use your whole body gently, because a single careless habit can become a lasting ache. You keep the tire from rolling by bracing it with one forearm. You change the angle of the blade instead of forcing it straight through a stubborn patch. You pause for a breath when the seam dips awkwardly around the shoulder. These are not grand skills, and they may never be written down, but they keep a trimmer working. In a room like this, wisdom is often just a way to be less sore by Saturday. The pace matters. Not the pace of a stopwatch alone, though production numbers are always somewhere in the room, hanging over the day like a second ceiling. It is the pace of the hands, the flow from tire to tire, the time spent on a rough one, the little delay while a blade is touched to the stone, the half-second decision whether a floor needs more trimming or should go to someone else's notice. You feel the pressure to move quickly, but quickness has to be quiet. Rushing leaves marks. The foreman has a way of passing that you can sense before he stops. His shoes make a clipped sound on the floor, and his shadow crosses the edge of your bench. He may not say much. He may lift a tire, run his own finger over the seam, look at the pile waiting behind you, and move on. In the 1920s, Akron's rubber plants were full of men who understood output in practical terms, and though some foremen were fairer than others, the factory's general hunger was not subtle. More tires meant more cars on roads, more orders filled, more rubber moving through the city. You are one person in that movement, but your station is close enough to the finished product that mistakes feel exposed. A rough edge might be noticed in inspection. A sliced sidewall might mean waste. A missed strand of flash might draw a complaint. The tire is heavy with labor before it reaches you, and that makes your part feel smaller and heavier at once. You are not building the whole thing, but you are expected not to spoil what others have built. At times, you can almost admire the tire as an object. It is a ring of careful layers, fabric and rubber, tread and sidewall, built to bear the weight of a car over roads that are still rough in many places. In the 1920s, roads could be paved, graveled, muddy, frozen, broken, or still being improved, and tires had to meet them all. That thought may pass through you while you trim the edge, though not in the grand language of industry. Mostly you think, this one's clean, or this one's stubborn, or this one came out hot enough to bite the hand. A lunch pail waits somewhere nearby, perhaps with bread, cold meat, an apple, a wedge of pie if the morning has been kind. You think of it before the bell, because the body begins thinking ahead before the mind admits it. The smell of rubber has covered the smell of food, but not the desire for it. Your mouth tastes faintly of dust. Your hands need washing, though even after washing they will not look clean in the way an office man's hands might look clean. There is a fellowship in the room, but it is practical and spare. Men talk when talk fits the work. They mention rent, baseball, a child's cough, a streetcar delay, a new batch of molds, a rumor about hours, the price of coal, the way one tire size is worse than another. They do not always look at one another while speaking, because their eyes must stay with the blade. Conversation comes in pieces, like the flash you trim away, small curled things that fall between tasks. And yet, those small exchanges matter. A joke, softened by fatigue, can make the hour pass more kindly. A warning about a bad batch can spare your thumb. A borrowed whetstone can save a morning. You begin to know the men around you by the sounds they make as much as by their faces. One clearing his throat, one tapping the knife handle twice before cutting, one humming the same bar of a song until someone asks him quietly to choose another. Workplaces like this keep a record in sound. When the lunch bell finally comes, it doesn't arrive like freedom, exactly, but like a loosening of the belt around the day. You put the knife down, straighten slowly, and feel your back announce the posture you have been keeping. The room shifts as men step away from benches, open pails, wash hands, find walls to lean against, and let the noise of the machines become, for a few minutes, someone else's concern. The tires wait. They always wait. By the time the lunch hour softens the room and then releases it again, we return with you to the bench, where the afternoon work begins with the same tools, but a different kind of tiredness. After lunch, the Akron tire mold trimmer comes back to a bench that seems to have waited patiently, though nothing about the work has become easier while you were away. The knife is where you left it. The tire beside it has cooled. The scrap curls remain in their little black heap, and the rag has slumped over the edge of the bench like a tired hand. You take your place again, and the day resumes without asking whether you're ready. Afternoon light changes the factory. It enters through high windows at a lower angle, showing dust in the air and brightening the edges of things that otherwise seem plain. You see the fine powder on the sill, the uneven shine on the tire surface, the pale marks where rubber has scuffed the bench. Outside, if a window is cracked, you might hear a wagon wheel or a motor car passing beyond the plant yard. But inside the building, the factory keeps its own hours. It is always work o'clock here, no matter what the sun says. The first tire after lunch often feels heavier than it should. Your hands have cooled slightly, your shoulders have noticed their own relief, and now the body must be persuaded back into its narrow patience. You turn the tire and find the seam. You angle the knife and begin. The rubber comes away in a strip, not perfectly, because this one has a thick place near the bead, and you have to slow down, take another pass, rub it with your thumb, and look again. This is one of the quiet difficulties of trimming. The work asks you to hurry and slow down at the same time. You are expected to keep the pile moving, yet every uneven place wants its own little moment. A careless cut can spoil the surface. A neglected roughness can embarrass the finish. So you learn to ration attention, giving enough to each tire without giving so much that the line behind you grows too large. That balance is not relaxing. Though from the outside it may look like simple repetition, the tire mold itself, though not always in your hands, is part of the story. Heavy metal molds hold the tread pattern and sidewall markings, and when rubber is heated and pressed inside them, every groove, letter, and line must form cleanly. The mold gives the tire its face. It also gives you the flash, the seam, the little excess that squeezes where metal meets metal, the small imperfections that belong to pressure and heat. You are cleaning up after a powerful process that cannot quite finish itself. You may see the lettering on the sidewall as you work, raised and dark, bearing a company name that AKRON knows well. Goodyear, Firestone, Goodrich, and other names move through the city not only as businesses, but as weather systems, shaping streets, wages, neighborhoods, and family hopes. To the person buying tires, the name may mean reliability or modern travel. To you, it may mean which plant gate you enter, which foreman watches your row, which smell clings to your coat, and which tired men walk home beside you when the shift ends. In the 1920s, Akron grew around rubber with almost feverish speed, and a worker could feel that growth in crowded rooms, boarding houses, busy streetcars, new shops, and long factory walls that seemed to stretch with the orders. People came for work because work was there, though not always gentle, not always secure, and not always fair. The tire mold trimmer was part of that boom, but the boom did not trim his tires for him. It did not ease his wrist. It did not keep rubber dust from settling into the lines of his hands. The afternoon is when mistakes become easier, not because you care less, but because the mind drifts and the body grows economical without permission. You may think of a bill, a room, a child, a letter, a baseball score, a pair of shoes that needs mending, and then the blade catches slightly, reminding you that the tire is still here. You return to it. You breathe out. You take the next cut more carefully. There is a small ritual in sharpening the knife. You lift the whetstone dark and smooth from use and draw the blade across it with a sound like a whisper being folded. Not loud, not dramatic, just steel meeting stone in a steady rhythm. A sharper edge makes the work cleaner, and for a few tires afterward, the blade moves with less argument. You notice the difference at once, because the hand knows relief before the mind gives it a name. A good trimmer doesn't simply cut everything he sees. He judges. Some raised bits must come away completely. Some are harmless if smoothed. Some marks are not trimming problems at all, but signs for inspection. You learn the border between correction and concealment, between finishing and pretending. And you learn that the factory's desire for speed can sometimes tug against the worker's plain knowledge of quality. That little tension follows you through the afternoon, quiet but steady. The tires come in different sizes, and the size changes the feel of the work. Smaller tires may be easier to handle, though they can crowd the wrist with tight curves. Larger ones have more weight, more surface, more seam, and more chance to tire the arms before the edge is done. Some treads have patterns that hold small scraps or make the surface awkward to grip. You turn them anyway, you work around them. Your hands become acquainted with the shapes of a changing automobile age. The room warms as the day goes on. Coats are long since off, sleeves are rolled, the rubber smell deepens and the oil smell from the machines threads through it. Sweat gathers under the collar and dries again in the draft. The taste of lunch fades, replaced by the flat taste of factory air. Your shirt sticks lightly to your back. When you wipe your forehead with your sleeve, the cloth comes away faintly grey. Yet the work has its hypnotic side, and perhaps this is why we can stand beside it softly now, listening for the slower truth beneath the discomfort. Cut, turn, inspect. Smooth. Cut, turn, inspect, smooth. The motion doesn't make the job kind, but it does make it knowable, and there is comfort in work that reveals its pattern, even when the pattern is tiring. Your mind can rest on the rhythm without fully leaving the task. You may start to notice tiny beauties, because the human mind often does that when placed among plain things for long enough. The trimmed rubber curls catch the light along one edge. Steam rises faintly where a still warm tire meets cooler air. The sidewall lettering shines when your thumb passes over it. A blade newly sharpened leaves a clean line that is almost pleasing. These are not enough to make the job good exactly, but they are enough to make the day human. As afternoon light lowers and the pile of finished tires grows behind the bench, we move with the tired hands of the Akron trimmer toward the parts of the work that follow him beyond the factory floor. By the later afternoon, the Akron tire mold trimmer has entered the hour when work begins to leave marks not only on the bench, but on the person. You feel the ache in your forearm when you set down the knife. You feel the faint sting of small cuts when sweat finds them. You feel the grit at the corners of your eyes, and when you blink, the black curve of the tire seems to remain there for a moment, printed softly behind the lids. The day has been repetitive, but it has not been light. The factory does not ask whether the work follows you home. It simply releases you when the shift is done, and by then the smell of rubber has settled into your clothes with the certainty of weather. On the streetcar, other passengers may know where you work before you say a word. Men from the rubber plants carry that scent together, warm, industrial, and faintly sour. And in Akron, it is familiar enough that people may not comment unless they are new to town. The city itself has learned to breathe around it. Before you leave, there is the matter of cleaning the station. You gather the larger scraps, you wipe the bench, you put the knife where it belongs, or carry it, if that is the practice in your corner of the plant. The scrap pile is swept or boxed not because it matters to the tire now, but because tomorrow's work needs a place to begin. A bench buried in yesterday's shavings is a poor greeting. Even in hard places, workers make small orders against disorder. The hands are hardest to clean. You wash with soap that bites the skin a little, rubbing the fingers, palms, nails, and knuckles, watching grey water swirl into the basin. It helps, but it doesn't return the hands to what they were before the shift. The creases remain dark, the cuts remain, the skin feels dry and slightly swollen. When you flex your fingers, they answer slowly, as though they are coming back from a distance. You might think of wages then, because wages are one way a worker measures what the body has given. Pay in the rubber industry could draw people to Akron, but it didn't erase the cost of long hours, crowded conditions, layoffs, foremen, speed, and the uncertainty that lived beneath factory prosperity. A tire mold trimmer might not have the worst job in the plant, and that comparison could be true without making his own work gentle. Many hard things remain hard, even when harder things are nearby. There is also pride, but it is practical pride, not polished pride. You know when you have done a decent day's work. You know when the finished tires behind you look clean along their seams. You know the difference between a tire rushed through and one trimmed with care. The foreman may say little, the company may say nothing, and the customer will never know. But the hand knows. The hand keeps its own account. Outside, Akron's evening may smell of rain, coal smoke, hot brick, and the lingering breath of rubber plants cooling after a day's labor. Street lamps come on one by one. Storefronts glow, men walk with lunch pails, coats over arms, shoulders rounded forward in the posture left by work. You walk among them, and the city seems built from shifts ending and beginning, from doors opening, whistles sounding, and families arranging their evenings around the factory clock. At home, or in a rented room, the quiet may feel strange at first. The ears continue to hear belts and carts after the sounds are gone. The hands may keep the motion of trimming, thumb pressing, wrist turning, blade drawing along an invisible seam. You may sit at a table and realize your body is still working in small, ghostly ways. The factory loosens slowly. It doesn't disappear at the gate. Food tastes different after such a day. Bread is more solid. Coffee is warmer. Soup seems to reach places that factory heat never touched. If there is conversation, it may be plain and domestic. A repair needed, money owed, a neighbor's news, a child's lesson, a shirt to be washed, a Sunday plan if Sunday is close enough to imagine. You may not describe the trimming in detail because the details would sound small to someone who hasn't felt them gather. You say, "It was a long day," and the words are both too little and enough. The job's unpleasantness was not always spectacular, and that is part of its truth. It was not one great event, but many small frictions. Warm air, sharp tools, aching joints, rubber dust, watchful foreman, uneven molds, the pressure to hurry, the need to be careful, the smell that followed you, and the knowledge that tomorrow would likely resemble today. The trouble lived in accumulation. It was the pile of scraps on the bench, only inside the body. And yet, we should be careful with the word sucked, because even a hard job can hold ordinary dignity. The Akron tire mold trimmer may have disliked the ache, the smell, the pace, and the dull sameness, while still taking satisfaction in clean work and steady wages. People are large enough to hold both things. You can be grateful for work and tired of it. You can be proud of skill and weary of needing it every day. By evening, the factory has not vanished. It glows behind windows, exhales from vents, and holds the next shift in its brick lungs. Somewhere, molds are being opened, rubber is being moved, tires are being checked, and benches like yours are waiting under lamps. Akron's rubber world does not sleep all at once. It rests in sections, like a machine whose parts take turns cooling. And as night settles over the streets and the rubber smell thins beneath damp air, we turn back once more toward the beginning of the process, to understand why those rough edges existed at all, and why your quiet trimming bench was needed. Before the Akron tire mold trimmer ever touches the tire, the rubber has traveled through a long chain of hands, machines, heat, pressure, and judgment, and knowing that chain makes your small bench feel less separate from the rest of the factory. We can follow it softly, not in a hurry, because the tire has already taken its shape by the time it reaches you. It began as raw material, as rubber that had to be mixed with other substances, worked until consistent, strengthened, built around fabric or cords, and prepared for curing. By the time you see it, many workers have already left their traces. In the mixing rooms, rubber was blended with ingredients that changed its strength, color, and behavior. Carbon black helped give durability and the deep black look people came to expect. Sulfur played its role in vulcanization, the curing process that made rubber more useful by changing its structure under heat. Other materials entered according to recipes held by the company and adjusted by experience. Those rooms could be dirty, hot, and powerful, with mills that drew material between rollers and turned soft mass into sheets that could be handled. You might never work those mills, but their presence is in every tire you trim. When the rubber cuts cleanly, someone upstream helped make it so. When it drags, tears, or shows a strange patch, something earlier may have gone unevenly. Industrial work is like that. One person's ease may depend on another person's care, and one small irregularity can travel down the line until it arrives in front of your knife. The factory joins people who may never speak to one another. The tire building work required its own patience. Layers had to be placed, shaped, joined, and prepared so that the tire would hold together under the weight and motion of a car. The building drum, the fabric, the beads, the tread, and the sidewall all belonged to a careful sequence. You know the tire as a finished ring, but before curing it was more pliable, more unfinished, almost soft in its future. Then came the mold, and the mold made it final. The mold is heavy, exact, and unforgiving. It carries the tread pattern in metal, along with sidewall lettering and other details, and it must close around the tire with enough precision to shake the rubber under heat. But even good molds leave places where excess rubber squeezes out. The seam where mold halves meet can produce flash, a thin, unwanted fin that must be removed. Vent holes may allow trapped air to escape, but they can leave little rubber hairs or nubs. What helps the tire form can also leave traces that need your work. This is why the trimmer's job sits in a humble but necessary place. The great machinery does most of the shaping, but machinery does not always finish gently. It presses, heats, closes, opens, and releases. The human hand follows, noticing what metal and pressure cannot care about. Your knife is small compared with the mold, but it handles the final visible line. It gives the tire the neatness that the mold almost gave, but not quite. You can feel this relationship in the work. The mold makes the line, you refine it. The press gives shape, you remove the excess. The company name rises from the sidewall by force of metal, but your hand makes sure its edge isn't spoiled by ragged rubber. You are not the maker in the grand sense, yet you are part of the making, and anyone who has ever finished wood, cloth, leather, stone, or bread knows that the last small actions can matter more than their size suggests. Sometimes a tire comes to you with a seam so delicate that trimming feels almost like brushing dust from a table. Sometimes it comes with a thick lip that makes your wrist tense before the cut begins. There may be places where the flash is thin and easy, then a sudden heavy clump where rubber has squeezed too generously. You adjust without complaint. The blade angle changes. The pressure changes. The tire turns in your hands like a stubborn clock. On rougher tires, the work slows. You must take a first pass, then a second, then perhaps scrape a spot that still looks raised. Each additional pass increases the chance of marking the tire, and so your care sharpens just when your patience may be thinning. This is one of the small unfairnesses of the job. The harder tire takes more time and exposes you to more blame, though the roughness did not begin at your bench. Still, it arrives as your problem. The foreman may know this, or he may not care to know it. A good foreman understands that not every tire is equal. A poor one sees only the count. Workers learn which kind they have and adjust the day accordingly, speaking less when the wrong shoes come down the aisle. In a 1920s plant, authority could feel close and personal, not a policy on a paper far away, but a man standing by your bench, looking at your hands, measuring speed with his mood. You might mark a defective tire aside if something is beyond trimming. That act has its own tension because stopping the flow is never neutral. Was the flaw real enough? Should you have handled it? Will someone say you are being careful, or slow, or difficult? Most workers know this feeling in one form or another, the delicate matter of telling a system that the thing in front of you isn't right. It asks for confidence, but confidence is not always easy when wages and tempers share the same room. The tire itself is quiet, of course. It does not explain where its flaws came from. It simply lies on the bench, warm or cooling, heavy, black, smelling of the process that made it. You read it as best you can. You turn it toward the light. You cut what can be cut. You leave what should be left. This is the trimmer's small wisdom, earned through repetition and kept mostly inside the body. And as the last of the afternoon presses against the windows, we stay with that small wisdom a little longer, following the trimmer through the habits that make a hard job possible to endure. A 1920s AKRON tire mold trimmer survives the day through habit, and the habits are so quiet that they may look like nothing from the outside. You place the tire at a certain angle. You set the knife within reach, but not where it will be knocked to the floor. You keep the scrap pile from spreading into your workspace. You touch the blade to the stone before it becomes uselessly dull. You rub a trimmed edge with your thumb, not because anyone told you to every time, but because touch sometimes sees better than sight. Your eyes have learned to search the black surface without becoming lost in it. Black rubber under factory light can flatten itself, hiding slight ridges until the tire is tilted. So you shift it against the glow, watch for a raised line to catch brightness, then turn it again. The work is visual, but it is also tactile, and after enough days you can feel with surprising certainty when a seam is finished. The thumb passes over the edge, and the body knows. There are little economies of movement. You don't lift more than necessary. You roll when rolling will do. You keep your elbows close when the bench is crowded. You turn the tire in a way that brings the seam toward the blade rather than chasing the seam around awkwardly. None of this sounds grand, yet these economies are the difference between ending the day tired and ending it nearly emptied. The body learns thrift because the factory spends it freely. Your clothing has its own role. Sleeves rolled too loosely can catch. A collar buttoned too high becomes unbearable in the heat. Shoes with thin soles make the floor harder by noon. Aprons or work coats protect a little, though rubber dust and grime find their way around any defense. By the end of the day, clothing carries a record of where you stood, what you touched, how warm the room became, and how many times your forearm brushed the bench. The room's light can be a friend or an annoyance. A lamp placed well shows the scene cleanly. A lamp placed badly throws glare off the tire's curve and makes the raised flash harder to see. In winter, the daylight fades early, and the lamps take on more of the burden. In summer, heat presses through the windows and gathers with the heat of curing, and light itself can feel warm on the skin. You learn to move the tire toward the best light without losing time. Every worker develops private standards, even when the official standard is something else. You may trim a little cleaner than the minimum because you dislike roughness. You may leave no long whiskers if you can help it, because they make the tire look unfinished. You may take pride in a sidewall that passes your thumb without catching. These private standards are fragile under pressure, but they matter. They are a way of keeping yourself present inside repetitive work. The job also teaches limits. Some floors cannot be made beautiful with a trimming knife. Some cuts would only make things worse. Some days, the flow of tires is too rough and too fast for every edge to receive the care you would prefer. You learn to accept the difference between careful enough and perfect, because factory work seldom leaves room for perfection in the old artisan sense. It asks for repeatable adequacy, steady output, and hands that can keep going. That could be discouraging if we look at it too sharply, but there is another gentler way to understand it. Many human lives are built from careful enough. A mended cuff, a swept step, a pot of coffee, a sharpened pencil, a tire trimmed cleanly enough to roll out into the world. Not flawless, not celebrated, just sound, ordinary, useful. Your work belongs to that family of tasks that make daily life possible without asking to be noticed. When fatigue rises, you may count without admitting that you're counting. 5 more before you sharpen, 10 more before you stretch, this batch before the bell. The numbers are not always exact, and perhaps you lose them when conversation passes, but the mind likes small shores in a long afternoon. You give yourself a next place to reach, and then another. Work becomes a series of little crossings. The men around you do the same in their own ways. One keeps a bit of newspaper folded in his lunch pail, saved for the ride home. One talks about a garden behind a rented house. One has a child who likes to meet him near the corner if the weather is fair. One is saving for a better room, a better coat, a train ticket, a ring, or nothing so clear as all that. Just a margin between wages and worry. These thoughts float around the benches, ordinary and precious. The factory can make people seem interchangeable from a distance. Rows of workers, benches, tires, tools, and clocks. But up close, each person carries a whole weather of concerns, and the work passes through that weather. Your knife moves while your mind holds a name, a debt, a hope, a sore tooth, a song, a memory of a farm, a boarding room smell, a church bell from childhood, a street in Akron shining after rain. The body stays at the bench. The mind travels softly. This is one reason the job is tiring beyond the muscles. You must keep attention tethered to the blade while life tugs from every direction. The seam is black and narrow. The thoughts are wide. You bring yourself back again and again, not dramatically, but faithfully, the way a person returns a thread to the needle. The work asks for that returning all day. By late afternoon, the finished tires stand as proof of hours. They may be stacked, rolled away, or sent onward for inspection and storage, moving out of your reach and into the larger flow of shipping, sales, and roads. You may never see them again. A tire you trimmed could end up on a delivery truck, A family car, a farm vehicle, or a taxi, rolling through rain and dust while you are back at the bench with another one. The thought is almost too large to hold, so you let it pass. And as the shift edges closer to its end, we follow the trimmer into the final stretch, where the day becomes slower, heavier, and strangely quieter inside the noise. The last part of the shift is not silent, but for the Akron tire mold trimmer, it can feel inwardly quiet, because fatigue narrows the world until only the next clean cut seems fully present. The room still hums. Carts still pass. Men still speak in low voices. A door still opens and closes at the far end of the floor. But inside your own attention, the sounds soften, and the bench becomes the small island where the day must finish. This is when the body wants shortcuts. It suggests them gently at first. Leave that tiny nub, make one rough pass instead of two. Don't turn the tire all the way toward the light. Let the next man notice it. Every worker knows these suggestions, and every worker has answered them differently on different days. You are tired, not made of iron, and the factory has already taken much of what your hands had to give. Still, the tire lies there, waiting for a decision. You make the clean cut when you can. Not always perfectly, and not always with pleasure, but with enough steadiness to keep your name clean in your own mind. There is a kind of sleepiness in the motion now, but not the sleep of bed and darkness. It is the sleepiness of repeated effort, where the mind stays just awake enough to steer the body. You turn the tire, you trim the seam, you brush the scrap aside. You look again. The light has changed. High windows now hold a duller color, and lamps have become more noticeable. Shadows gather under benches and inside the curves of tires. The black rubber seems blacker in the later hour, and your eyes work harder to separate edge from surface. You tilt the tire toward the lamp, watching the seam lift into view. A thin line catches the light. The knife follows. If the factory whistle or bell is near, everyone knows it without saying. The room has a subtle leaning in it, a shared awareness that the day is drawing toward release. Men do not stop working too soon, because stopping too soon is visible, but their minds begin folding themselves toward coats, streetcars, suppers, and the first breath of outside air. You feel it too. The last tires have a different weight, as though they carry all the hours that came before them. A trimmer's final minutes can be awkward. You don't want to begin a tire you cannot finish, but you may not be allowed simply to stand idle. You take what comes. You trim what can be trimmed. You leave the bench orderly enough for the next start. A worker learns to end without appearing to end, to slow the mind while keeping the hands properly occupied. This is one of the small arts of factory life. When the bell comes, it moves through the room with a force that is not loudness alone. It changes the meaning of every object. The knife becomes a thing to put down. The tire becomes the last tire. The bench becomes a place to leave. The ache in your back, which had been waiting politely at the edge of awareness, steps forward at once. You straighten, and the body tells you the story of the day in one long, stiff breath. You clean the blade carefully, because a tool left dirty punishes tomorrow's hand. You wipe the handle. You clear the curls of rubber. You may count finished pieces or note what remains depending on the habits of the shop. Around you, the room loosens into movement. Lunch pails close. Stools scrape. A man laughs more loudly than he did an hour ago. Another man says little, saving his words for home. The walk to the wash area is part of the shift, though not always counted as such. The floor seems longer now. Your legs remember standing. Your shoulders remember leaning. The smell of soap is sharp and almost bright after rubber and oil, and the water, if it runs warm, feels like a kindness too ordinary to mention aloud. You rub your hands, watching black streaks loosen slowly, though not completely. Some of the day remains with you. At the coat hooks, the air may be cooler. Wool, damp cloth, sweat, and factory dust mingle in a tired human smell. You put on your coat, and for a moment, the clean outside of it meets the dirty cuffs of the shift beneath. Men become street versions of themselves again, hats on, pails in hand, shoulders moving toward doors. The factory has held them all day, and now it lets them spill out into evening. Outside, the first breath can feel thin and wonderful. Even if the air is smoky and cold, it is not factory air. That difference is enough. You may hear streetcars, hoofbeats in older streets, motor engines, a dog somewhere behind a fence, the murmur of workers leaving in groups. The city receives the shift the way it received the morning crowd, without ceremony but with recognition. Akron is full of such departures. The trimmer's hands may still curl slightly, as though around the knife handle. His thumb may rub against his fingers, feeling for a seam that isn't there. His eyes may notice edges on things, the lip of a curb, the molding of a door, the ragged hem of a poster pasted to a wall. Work changes what a person sees. After enough days trimming tires, the world offers lines to smooth everywhere. There is a sadness in that, perhaps, but also a quiet tenderness. We are shaped by what we do, and not only by the parts we choose. The body learns the day's demands. The senses adapt. The mind finds small shelters. A tire mold trimmer in 1920s Akron may not have spoken of such things in those words, but he would have known their truth in his bones, especially when the evening chair received him and the hands finally opened. And as the factory lamps burn behind the windows and the city begins its softer night, we stay just a little longer with the human life around the job, where work, home, and sleep touch one another. For the Akron tire mold trimmer, home is not separate from the factory in the clean way a map might suggest, because the day crosses the distance with him, riding in his coat, his hands, his posture, and the quiet fatigue behind his eyes. He may live in a boarding house with other rubber workers, or with family in a small rented home, or in a room near a streetcar line, where the morning ride can be counted almost by the number of turns. Wherever he sleeps, the factory has a way of entering before he does. You can imagine the door opening into a warmer room, with supper smells rising to meet rubber and cold air. Potatoes, onions, coffee, cabbage, bread, beans, meat if the week allows it. A stove gives off steady heat. A chair waits beside a table. The light is softer than factory light, and because it is softer, it reveals how tired you are. You sit down, and the body seems to settle by sections. Shoulders first, then knees, then hands. The hands are noticed. They are work hands, which is not an insult, only a fact. The skin is roughened and darkened in the lines. A bandage may need changing. A small cut may reopen when you reach for a cup. Someone may say you should be careful, and you may answer that you are careful, which is true and not enough. In such jobs, care reduces harm, but does not remove it. The blade remains sharp. The rubber remains resistant. The day remains long. If there are children nearby, they may know not to touch the lunch pail before it is emptied, or they may touch it anyway, curious about the factory smell that clings to everything. They may see the scraps sometimes, if a bit of rubber rides home in a pocket, and roll it between their fingers, not understanding how many tires their fathers or uncles or boarders' hands have turned that day. To them, the rubber may be a small, odd treasure. To you, it is just a piece that followed you out. Evening conversation may be brief. Some workers talk the day out of themselves, telling every annoyance until the room has helped carry it. Others go quiet. A tire mold trimmer might be either kind, depending on the day, the household, the pay envelope, the foreman, the weather, and how badly the wrist has begun to ache. Silence after factory noise can feel medicinal. It can also feel lonely. Often it is both. There may be chores still, coal to bring in, a shirt to wash, boots to scrape, a letter to write, a neighbor to visit. The workday does not always end when paid work ends, especially for families where every hour and object must be stretched. You may want only to sit, but life has its own bench waiting. The difference is that these evening tasks carry familiar human purposes, and even when they tire you, they belong more openly to your own small world. In Akron, the rubber companies shaped more than working hours. They shaped housing, traffic, social life, church schedules, shop hours, and the rhythm of paydays. A city built around factories becomes a city built around whistles and shifts, around men returning at certain hours and women planning meals around uncertain tiredness. The tire mold trimmer is one worker among many, but his day fits into a larger pattern of lives arranged around rubber. The tire plants made products, yes, but they also made evenings. The body seeks rest in small ways before sleep. You may hold your hands near the stove and let heat soak into the stiff joints. You may wash again, more slowly this time, not for the factory's sake, but for your own. You may sit by a window and listen to the neighborhood settle, hearing steps on the walk, a door latch, a streetcar bell farther away, and the low talk of people passing under the evening lamps. These sounds are lighter than the factory's sounds. They have space around them. The tiredness is not empty. It has texture. There is the heavy tiredness in the legs from standing, the fine tiredness in the eyes from watching seams, the sharp tiredness in the thumb from pressure, and the deep tiredness of knowing the same station will be waiting tomorrow. If the week has been long, even sleep may not seem long enough to smooth it all away, yet the body does what bodies do. It takes the rest it can find. Perhaps Sunday carries a different air if the schedule allows it. The factory smell fades a little from the skin. Clean clothes sit differently on the body. Streets seem wider when you are not rushing towards a gate, but even then, the knowledge of Monday waits somewhere beyond the day, not cruelly, not theatrically, just steadily. The bench will be there. The knife will be there. Tires will come. The work will resume. This is why the job could feel so hard without needing any single dramatic disaster. Its difficulty lived in recurrence. The same movement, the same pressure to be quick and careful, the same small pain made ordinary by wages, the same pride kept private because no one outside the room knew enough to praise it properly. The sameness did not make the work meaningless, but it made the person carrying it very tired. And still, we can see the worker whole, not only as a pair of hands at a bench, not only as a figure in a factory line, but as someone with habits, irritations, skill, humor, hunger, hopes, and a need for sleep. The Akron tire mold trimmer of the 1920s was not simply a symbol of industrial labor. He was a person who learned the feel of rubber, the moods of blades, the sound of a foreman's shoes, and the relief of a chair at the end of the day. As the night grows deeper and the room at home grows quieter, we return one final time to the bench in memory, not to make the work larger than it was, but to let its small truth settle gently. The bench is empty now, but it still holds the shape of the Akron tire mold trimmer's day, in the shallow cuts across the wood, the darkened edge where hands have rested, and the fine black dust that resists every sweep. A lamp hangs above it. A knife lies where it belongs. The air is cooler without the full force of the shift around it, though the smell of rubber remains, folded into brick, wood, cloth, and iron. The factory after work is never truly clean, but it can be still. In that stillness, the day's motions become easier to see. Tire lifted, seam found, blade angled, rubber shaved, edge touched. Tire turned, scrap brushed aside, again and again, until the work becomes almost a pattern woven in the air above the bench. You can stand beside it now without hurry, and because no foreman is counting, because no pile is growing behind you, the motions seem less like pressure and more like a quiet craft hidden inside industry. That is one of the gentle surprises of such forgotten jobs. Inside the hard system, there are small human skills. A tire mold trimmer did not design the tire, own the factory, or appear in the advertisements, but he knew something precise and useful. He knew how rubber behaved under a blade. He knew how a seam should feel. He knew when a raised edge was harmless, when it was ugly, and when it suggested a deeper problem. He knew by repetition, and repetition is one of the oldest teachers we have. The job sucked, in the plain sense that it wore on the body and gave little glory in return. It smelled, stained, ached, and repeated. It asked for care while offering monotony, and it placed a worker near the end of a costly process where mistakes could be visible and praise could vanish. It made the hands rough and the shoulders tired. It followed a person home. These are not small things when they happen every day, but the job also belonged to real life, and real life is seldom one color. There was pay, there was skill, there were co-workers whose voices made the hours less empty. There was the clean satisfaction of a rough edge made smooth. There was the knowledge that a tire leaving the plant carried in some small way the touch of your hand. There was the evening after, when the knife was no longer in your palm, and the room at home held you more gently than the factory could. We can let the image become soft now. The bench waits in low light. The scraps have been swept into a bin. The molds elsewhere in the plant are cooling, their heavy metal holding the last warmth of the day. A cart stands still near the aisle. The high windows reflect the lamps inside, and beyond them Akron settles under smoke, mist, and the muted glow of a working city. The knife is quiet. The tires have rolled onward. The worker has gone home, carrying the ache but also leaving part of it behind, because even hard days loosen their grip when night deepens enough. The factory will call again, but not in this moment. For now, the tools are where they belong. The bench is cleared, the rubber smell rests in the dark, and you can let the long rhythm of the work fade slowly into sleep. And yet, in the quiet after the shift, the bench does not vanish from the mind all at once, because work so repetitive leaves a soft copy of itself inside the body. You may lie in bed and feel the ghost of the tire's curve beneath your forearm, while the thumb remembers the seam and the wrist repeats the little turn it made all day. The room is dark, the street outside is calmer, and still the Akron tire mold trimmer carries a faint circle of rubber through his sleep. Morning will find that circle again, patiently waiting in the same place. Before the sun is high, you will step back into the plant with other men whose faces look pale in the early light, and the factory will accept you without surprise. It does not need to be angry to be hard. It only needs to be constant, and in 1920s Akron, constancy had the sound of whistles, time clocks, rolling stock, factory bells, and the low daily thunder of rubber being made. The first minutes inside the plant have their own small ceremony, though no one would call it that. You hang your coat, check your tools, find your bench, and look at the waiting tires as though greeting a task that never went fully away. The knife may be duller than you remember. The rag may have dried stiff. The floor may carry a little grit from yesterday, and when your boots shift over it, the sound is faintly sandy under the larger hum of the room. By now, you know where the best light falls in the morning. You know where the draft comes under the door. You know which bench leg wobbles, which cart has the bad wheel, and which man will arrive with the joke before his hands are warm enough to begin. The Akron tire mold trimmer lives inside these details as much as inside wages or hours, because the small repeated facts of a workplace become a kind of map. You could walk it half asleep. The first tire comes to you with a dull warmth of curing still held inside it, and for a moment your fingers sink lightly against the surface before the rubber pushes back. There is a faint bloom of powder on the sidewall. The tread looks dark and new, the sidewall letters stand raised and glossy, and near the mold line a thin fin of excess rubber waits for the knife. You turn the tire into the light, and the day begins again in the old way. This is where a modern eye might miss the work. A person looking back through a photograph might see only men in caps, tires in rows, and factory walls softened by age. But from inside the room, nothing is soft in that sentimental way. The bench edge presses against your hip. The smell sits thick in your throat. The knife handle has a polished slickness from years of hands, and when the blade touches the seam, rubber resists with its own stubborn little language. The mold trimming bench is near the end of the making, but it is not outside the pressure of the rest. Every step before you seems to arrive at once in the tire's faults and virtues. A cleanly built tire trims kindly. A tire that has come from a tired mold or hurried handling asks more of you. And the extra labor is rarely announced as extra labor. It simply appears as a thicker ridge, a rougher shoulder, a stubborn whisker, a place where your blade must slow down while the pile behind you does not. You learn, slowly and without anyone making poetry of it, that the final finish of a thing can be one of the least visible labors in the world. Customers often admire what shines, what rolls, what carries a name, what promises miles, comfort, safety, and the freedom of a road stretching beyond town. They do not picture a man bending under a lamp, shaving away a ridge of rubber from a seam left by a heavy mold. If he has done his job well, there is almost nothing to picture. That hiddenness is part of the ache, though not the whole of it. A tire mold trimmer in Akron could spend 10 hours making defects disappear, and at the end of the day the disappearing itself would leave no sign except the soreness in his hand and the neatness of tires moving onward. There is a strange humility in such work, and not always a willing humility. Some days it feels like service. Some days it feels like being rubbed smooth by the same task until the edges of yourself are harder to find. Still, the morning can have a peaceful order, before fatigue has fully gathered. The tools are aligned, the first cuts are clean. The mind is not yet crowded. You hear the factory around you as a large, breathing thing, but for a while it does not press too heavily. A cart passes, a belt turns, a man coughs into his sleeve, and the knife moves through rubber with a sound so small it almost belongs to silence. As the new day settles over the trimming room, we move from that first rhythm into the slower business of how a worker learns the exact feel of good trimming, not as a lesson on paper, but as a craft taught by palms, blades, mistakes, and time. The Akron tire mold trimmer is trained by watching first, because in a busy factory no one has endless room for explanation. A more experienced man may show you how to hold the blade low, how to draw it rather than dig, how to keep the seam turning toward your hand instead of twisting your wrist around the tire. He may speak in short practical phrases, but most of the lesson is in his movement. You watch the angle, you watch the pressure, you watch how little he seems to force anything. Then the tire is yours, and the work becomes less simple at once. The blade that looked calm in another man's hand now feels slightly too eager, then too dull, then too uncertain. The seam seems to wander. The tire is heavier than it looked. The raised flash curls under the blade, but not evenly, and your first cut may leave a ragged place that must be corrected with a second, more careful pass. The old hand beside you might say nothing, which is sometimes kinder than saying everything. Over days, the awkwardness settles. Your wrist stops fighting the curve. Your thumb learns how close it can come to the blade. Your eyes begin to see the slight shine of raised rubber, and the sound of the cut tells you whether the blade is slipping cleanly or dragging. The Akron trimming bench teaches by repetition, and repetition can be stern, but it is also patient in its own rough way. It gives the same lesson until the body understands. A good trimming cut is not dramatic. It is a modest act, nearly invisible as it happens. The blade lies close to the sidewall, the hand moves steadily, and the strip of flash lifts away as though it had been waiting for permission. Too much pressure makes a scar. Too little leaves a ridge. The right pressure is learned through all the pressures that were wrong, and the hand remembers each one long after the mind has stopped counting. The rubber itself changes under different conditions, and you must change with it. A warm tire trims differently from a cool tire. A heavy flash trims differently from a thin one. A smooth sidewall asks for a lighter touch than a rougher section near the tread. Sometimes the blade skates. Sometimes it bites. Sometimes the excess rubber peels in a neat ribbon, and sometimes it comes off in reluctant crumbs that cling to the bench and fingers. There is a smell when the blade opens a fresh surface, faint but present beneath the larger factory air. It is warmer, cleaner, a little sharper, like the inside of the tire speaking briefly before the room's old odors cover it again. You may not notice it every time, but when the shift is quiet enough and the tire is still warm, the scent rises close to the hand. The work is full of these small sensations, too slight for conversation and too real to ignore. The trimmer's mistakes have their own textures. A shallow mistake feels like roughness under the thumb. A deep mistake can show as a nick, a little wound in the sidewall's clean curve, and that kind of mark makes the stomach tighten. Some mistakes can be smoothed, some cannot. A worker learns not only how to cut, but how to stop before the wish to fix something becomes worse than the flaw itself. That restraint is a kind of skill too. When you are tired, it can be tempting to chase perfection around the tire, shaving a little here, a little there, until the surface begins to show the attention too clearly. The best work knows when to leave well enough alone. A clean tire is not one that has been worried to death. It is one that has been handled with care and then released. The bench teaches the eyes to trust the fingers, and the fingers to trust the eyes. You look, touch, cut, and touch again. The sidewall passes under your thumb like a dark, smooth road in miniature. A raised edge catches. A proper edge lets the thumb travel without interruption. If someone asked you to measure the difference, you might struggle to describe it, yet your hand knows with quiet certainty. That is how practical knowledge often lives. In the early weeks, your attention may be sharp from anxiety, but later it becomes steadier and less frightened. You still watch closely because the blade requires it, but the fear of every motion softens into respect. The tire is no longer an unknown object, it is a familiar task with changing particulars. You can work and listen. You can trim and think. You can speak to the man beside you without losing the line, at least on an ordinary tire with an ordinary scene. The older workers may not praise often, but they notice. They notice whether your bench stays orderly, whether your scrap pile grows wild, whether your knife is sharp, whether rejected pieces collect around you, and whether you handle a rough batch without making a performance of suffering. In places like this, respect is rarely handed over in speeches. It arrives as a borrowed tool, a brief nod, a warning given before trouble reaches your station. The tire mold trimmer's craft is not delicate in the manner of a jeweler or cabinet maker, yet it belongs to the same family of handwork, where the object is changed by controlled contact. The material differs, the setting differs, the social value differs, but the old human relationship remains. A hand meets resistance, a tool carries intention. The surface changes, the worker judges the result, and begins again. And as your hands settle into that learned steadiness, the day begins to reveal another layer of the job. The social rhythm of men working close together, while each remains fixed to his own tire, his own bench, and his own private tiredness. In the Akron tire plant, companionship comes sideways, because the work faces you toward rubber rather than toward one another. You share the room, the heat, the smell, the foreman, the long hours, and the fatigue, but for much of the day your eyes stay lowered. Friendship grows in fragments, a sentence over a tire, a laugh while sharpening, a shared complaint about a batch that came out rough, a nod when the bell is still too far away. The men beside you may have come from farms, small towns, other factories, or other countries, drawn to Akron by the pull of rubber work and the promise of wages in a city that seemed to be expanding faster than it could house itself. Their accents, habits, and histories mix under the same lamps. One man may speak of land left behind. Another may speak of a shop he hopes to open. Another may say little for weeks, then tell a whole story. One rainy afternoon while trimming the cleanest batch of the month, you learn the safe topics first. Weather, streetcars, the quality of the tires, the foreman's mood, food, baseball, rent, a new pair of boots, a machine that ran poorly in another section. Deeper things may come later, if they come at all, because fatigue can make people careful with words. Still, a factory room has a way of gathering human truth in small pieces, and if you listen gently, you hear more than the machines. Someone always knows where to get a cheap lunch. Someone knows which boarding house has bedbugs. Someone knows which street floods after a hard rain. Someone has heard that a department may be hiring or cutting or changing hours. This informal knowledge moves from bench to bench like a second production line, quieter than the first, but often just as useful. The factory prints no bulletin for the things workers most need to know. There is also teasing mild when the room is kind and sharper when the day is sour. A man who trims too slowly may hear about it. A man who dulls his blade too quickly may be told he is trying to saw wood instead of rubber. A man who sings badly may be tolerated for one chorus and discouraged for the next. You learn to take some of this with a patient face, because the same men who tease may also lend a hand when a cart tips or a blade snaps. The sounds of other workers become part of your own rhythm. The scrape of a stool, the tap of a knife laid down, the soft slap of a tire turned on a bench, the cough of a man near the window, the low murmur of talk that rises when the foreman walks away and sinks when he returns. These sounds fill the spaces between your cuts, and after enough days they become almost comforting, because they mean you are not alone in the work. But togetherness has limits. If your wrist hurts, it is your wrist. If your count falls behind, the pressure lands on your bench. If a tire is spoiled under your blade, the mistake has your shape on it. Industrial labor creates fellowship and isolation at the same time, placing many people in one room while making each person answer for a narrow strip of the process. You are surrounded, and still the seam in front of you is yours alone. During a hard batch, conversation dries up. Everyone feels it. The tires arrive with heavy flash, rough lines, or stubborn vent nubs, and the room becomes a field of lowered heads. The knives move more slowly, the scrap curls thicker, the foreman's presence seems heavier, even from the aisle. You may hear only breathing, cutting, and the occasional small sound of annoyance when the rubber refuses to behave. In such hours, the job shows its teeth without raising its voice. Then a better batch arrives, and the room loosens. The seams are finer. The blades move easily. Men speak again. Someone mentions supper. Someone tells a story about a streetcar conductor who refused to wait for a late worker and got an earful from the worker's wife later that evening. The story may not be much, but it passes the time kindly, and kindness in a repetitive room has practical value. The Akron tire mold trimmer learns which men are generous with silence and which men require answers. He learns who has steady hands, who works angry, who hides pain, who watches the foreman too closely, who can make a dull hour less dull without making it noisy. These are workplace skills too, though nobody pays for them directly. Knowing how to remain beside others for long hours is not a small thing. At times, the room has a nearly domestic quality, though the word seems strange among tires and tools. Men bring pieces of themselves into the factory, and their habits settle around them like household objects. A pipe kept in a coat pocket for after work, a folded paper, a lucky coin, a photograph tucked where it won't be dirtied too badly, a lunch cloth washed and reused until it grows thin. Such things remind you that every worker has a life beyond the bench, even when the bench consumes most of his waking strength. And as the voices soften into the afternoon hum, we turn with you toward the broader city outside the factory walls, because the tire mold trimmer's day belongs not only to a bench, but to the whole rubber city that holds him. Akron in the 1920s is not just a place around the tire mold trimmer, it is the larger machine in which his life moves. The city smells of industry in damp weather. It glows through factory windows in the dark. Its streets carry men and women towards shifts, shops, schools, boarding houses, churches, taverns, and kitchens where factory schedules shape the hour of nearly everything. When you walk home from the plant, you are still inside the world that made the plant necessary. The rubber companies rise in public imagination as symbols of progress, and there is truth in that, because the automobile age is changing how people think about distance. Roads matter differently. Towns feel nearer. Goods move more readily. Families imagine trips that would have seemed difficult a generation earlier. Yet behind that widening sense of motion are workers whose own movements are often narrow and repeated, from room to gate, from streetcar to bench, from blade to seam. This contrast can sit strangely in the mind. The tire you trim may help someone travel far beyond Akron, while your own week may be bounded by shift times, wages, rent, fatigue, and the distance your body can manage after work. The product promises freedom, but the process asks for endurance. It is not hypocrisy exactly. It is one of the plain contradictions of industrial life, and workers feel such contradictions long before historians name them. The city grows crowded with the promise of work. Rooms fill, streets busy themselves. Stores advertise to men with pay envelopes. Families arrive and test whether the city can hold them. Some find opportunity, and some find only another form of strain, but most find both at once. The tire mold trimmer walks among people carrying mixed accounts because work can rescue and wear down the same person in the same year. On payday, the air may shift. There is relief in wages received, even when the money has already been claimed by rent, food, coal, shoes, debts, and the little emergencies that nibble at every household. You may fold the bills carefully. You may hand most of them over at home. You may keep a little for tobacco, a picture show, a cup of coffee, or some small purchase that makes a person feel less like an extension of a factory. The modest freedom of a few coins can matter. The picture houses, shops, and streets of Akron offer their own evening light, softer and more inviting than the factory lamps. Perhaps you stop at a counter where coffee smells stronger than rubber for once. Perhaps you pass a window filled with collars, hats, tools, or polished shoes you don't quite need and cannot quite forget. The city tempts workers with objects made possible by wages, and made difficult by those same wages. It is a practical kind of longing. On wet evenings, the streets reflect the lamps, and rubber workers step carefully around puddles darkened by soot. Streetcars carry tired bodies close together, shoulders touching, lunch pails resting between boots. Newspapers folded against chests. You may stand if the car is crowded, though standing after a day at the bench feels like a small injustice. The car rocks. The bell sounds. The windows fog. Akron passes by in blurred storefronts and brick walls. The work follows you in conversation too. People ask which plant, which department, which shift, how the hours are, whether the foreman is decent, whether there might be work for a cousin. A person's place in the rubber world becomes part of his introduction. You are not only a man named by family, street, church, or county, you are also a man from a plant, from a room, from a bench, where tires are trimmed clean after molding. This identity may bring pride but also weariness. To be known by hard work is not always the same as being understood. People may respect the wage without grasping the ache. They may admire the industry without imagining the smell in the shirt or the sharpness of the blade near the thumb. That gap is not cruel by itself. It is simply the distance between seeing a finished tire and standing all day beside the unfinished ones. Akron's neighborhoods hold many such distances. A person walking past a factory wall hears only the low roar within, while inside that roar are hundreds of small tasks, each with its own strain and skill. One worker cuts, one carries, one presses, one inspects, one trims. The factory becomes a single word from the street, but inside it is many rooms of human effort, each room making its own kind of tired. The tire mold trimmer's place in this city is modest, but not meaningless. He helps finish the objects that make Akron known. His hand touches the product near its departure into the world. He may never own a car, or he may dream of one, or he may regard cars as the concern of other people, but the tires pass through his fingers just the same. In that way, industrial workers often know objects more intimately than the customers who buy them. As evening returns, and the city's broader noise gathers around the worker, we drift back toward the trimming bench again, because the heart of this story remains there, in the narrow meeting of blade, rubber, hand, and time. At the bench, the Akron tire mold trimmer encounters time differently than the city outside does. The city counts growth, orders, traffic, money, buildings, and years, while the bench counts tires, cuts, turns, sharpenings, and bells. A minute can be measured by how far a seam has traveled under the knife. An hour can be measured by the height of the finished stack. A week can be measured by the soreness that arises before the body has fully recovered from the last one. There is clock time, of course. The punch clock is not a symbol to the worker. It is a practical gate through which wages pass. Too early, too late, overtime, lost time, lunchtime. Quitting time. The clock gives the day an official shape, but the body keeps another record underneath it. The body knows when the morning freshness leaves. It knows the hour when the room becomes warmest. It knows when the wrist begins to complain, and when the final bell becomes imaginable. A tire's own time is shorter. It arrives at your bench as an unfinished problem, and leaves as part of the finished flow. For those minutes, perhaps fewer when the work is smooth, you know it closely. You turn it, inspect it, clean it, and let it go. Then another comes. This endless replacement can make the day feel strangely without landmarks, because no single tire stays long enough to hold memory, unless it is especially troublesome. The ordinary ones vanish into number. To keep from being swallowed by sameness, the mind makes small markers. The first tire after lunch, the one with the bad seam, the one that trimmed beautifully, the batch from the mold everyone dislikes, the tire that smelled hotter than the rest, the one you nearly nicked but saved with a lighter hand. These are small stories, hardly worth telling later, yet they keep the hours from becoming one unbroken dark ring. The repetitive motion also changes the way thought moves. It does not always make thinking easier, because the blade needs attention, but it gives the mind a narrow path along which ideas can wander carefully. You may remember a childhood road after smelling wet dust from the yard. You may plan how to stretch a wage. You may replay a conversation. You may think of nothing more complicated than the next cup of coffee. The work allows thought only in measured amounts. Too much thinking can be dangerous. A blade follows the mind when the mind strays too far. So you develop a kind of divided awareness, one part anchored to the seam, the other allowed to drift just beyond reach. This is a familiar state in repetitive labor, and it can feel almost dreamlike when the body knows the task well. You are present, but not wholly caught by each motion. You are elsewhere, but not absent enough to fail. The factory may try to make time efficient, but the trimmer experiences it as texture. Some minutes are rough, dragged by bad rubber and tired hands. Some pass smoothly, with clean seams and easy cuts. Some are stretched by waiting for more work or by the uneasy attention of a supervisor. Some shrink when conversation warms the bench. A shift is never just a block of hours. It has grain, like wood, and the worker feels which way it runs. When production is heavy, the grain runs hard. Tires arrive steadily, and each finished piece only reveals the next one waiting. The bench becomes a place of almost continuous motion, and the difference between diligence and pressure becomes thin. You may feel pride in keeping up, but keeping up is a hunger that never praises for long. The factory consumes each completed task immediately, as though completion were only a signal to begin again. When production slows, the mood changes, but not always for the better. A quiet bench can mean relief, or it can mean worry. Workers know that too little work may carry its own threat, because wages and security depend on demand that no individual trimmer controls. The 1920s could feel prosperous, but prosperity did not spread evenly or promise permanence to every hand. A worker learns to distrust both too much hurry and too much stillness. That uncertainty sits beneath the daily routine like a cold board under a thin mattress. You may not think of it constantly, because no one can work well while staring all day at insecurity, but it waits under ordinary thoughts. How long will the work last? Will the plant keep running? Will the department change? Will there be enough next month? Such questions do not need loud answers to shape a person's sleep. Still, the bench remains immediate. Whatever the broader economy is doing, the tire in front of you has a seam that needs trimming. This can be a burden, but also a mercy, because immediate tasks give the mind a place to rest from larger fears. Cut this edge. Smooth this patch. Sharpen this blade. Finish this tire. Sometimes the small task is not an escape from life, but the only manageable doorway through it. And as the hour grows late in our telling, we let the bench, the clock, and the tired hands carry us into the quieter knowledge of what such work leaves behind, not in monuments or advertisements, but in memory, muscle, and ordinary objects. The Akron tire mold trimmer leaves little record compared with the company names stamped on the tires he handled. The advertisements survive more easily than the sore wrists. The factory buildings may be photographed, the machinery described, the output counted, and the executives named, while the finishing hands blur into groups. Yet the work happened one tire at a time, and no total number can fully hold the steady intimacy of that labor. History often remembers production, while bodies remember tasks. A man who trimmed tires for years would carry the job in ways both visible and hidden. His hands might become thickened, scarred, darkened in the lines, and strong in particular directions rather than general ones. His posture might keep a forward hint from years of leaning. His hearing might sort factory sounds with ease. His eyes might notice rubber seams, rough edges, and small finish flaws long after leaving the bench. Skill does not simply end when the shift does. Memory attaches itself to ordinary objects. A knife with a worn handle can hold more of a worker's life than a formal certificate. A lunch pail dented at one corner can recall years of mornings. A pair of boots stiffened by factory floors can tell a story of standing better than any speech about industry. The tire mold trimmer's world was full of such objects, plain, useful, and carrying the quiet pressure of repeated use. If he kept a bit of rubber, it might not have seemed sentimental at the time. A scrap in a pocket, a little strip brought home by accident, a child's toy for an evening, a wedge used to steady something in the house. Industrial leftovers often found second lives in working homes because useful material was rarely dismissed too quickly. Even waste could become a doorstop, a patch, a toy, a grip. or simply a curiosity that smelled faintly of the plant. The finished tire, by contrast, travelled away. It entered commerce, roads, garages, repair shops, and the lives of drivers who would never know whose hand smoothed its edge. It might roll through rain on a delivery truck, over dirt roads near a farm, along city streets under a taxi, or beside a family heading toward relatives in another town. The trimmer's labor moved outward in circles, literally and quietly, while the worker returned to the same room. There is something tender in that image, if we let it remain simple. A person may spend his life helping others move, while his own days follow a narrow path between home and work. That does not make the life small. It makes the object larger than it first appears. A tire is not only rubber, fabric, sulfur, heat, tread, and brand. It is also touch, fatigue, judgment, and all the unnamed hands that made it usable. The discomfort of the job should not be softened away. The Akron tire mold trimmer had to breathe unpleasant air, stand through long hours, risk small cuts, endure pressure for speed, and repeat careful motions until care itself became tiring. The work was dull and demanding at once, which is one of the most wearing combinations. A task can be difficult because it is dangerous, but it can also be difficult because it asks for attention while offering almost no variety. The mind grows tired of being needed in the same small way. But we can hold that truth without making the worker only a sufferer. He may have laughed, he may have taken pride in a clean batch, he may have enjoyed walking home on a cool evening after a stifling day, he may have loved payday, disliked Monday, trusted one co-worker, avoided another, and found small pleasures in ordinary things. A hard job does not erase the person doing it. It becomes one strand among many, even when the strand is thick. The factory's pace could make workers feel replaceable, yet the work itself depended on human judgment in small places. This is one of the quiet contradictions worth keeping. The system might count hands as labor, but the tire still needed a particular hand to guide a blade with enough care. Too much force, too little care, a dull edge, a wandering mind, and the finish suffered. Even in mass production, the human touch remained tucked into the final surface. When we imagine the trimmer now, it is easy to see only sepia light, old brick, and the romance of vanished industry. But the real room was warmer, dirtier, louder, and more repetitive than nostalgia likes to admit. The air held grit. The benches were scarred. Men were tired. Wages mattered. Supervisors mattered. A bad batch could sour an hour. A sore wrist could darken a week. The past is not made gentler by being past. Yet there is comfort in noticing accurately. To see the work clearly is a way of keeping company with the people who did it. We do not need to make the job noble beyond recognition, and we do not need to make it miserable beyond truth. We can stand quietly beside the bench, smell the rubber, feel the knife handle, hear the cartwheel, and understand that ordinary labor has its own depth. The depth is in repetition, in endurance, and in small exactness. As the memory of the factory settles once more into evening, we follow the last little thread of the job into the place where all repetitive work finally points, toward rest, where the hands release what they have held and the day becomes only a fading warmth in the dark. Rest does not come like a switch for the Akron tire mold trimmer. It comes gradually, as the noise of the plant thins from the ears and the body learns it is no longer being measured by output. The chair accepts him first, then the table, the cup, the small room, the evening air at an open window if the weather allows it. A person who has spent the day in controlled motion may need time to believe stillness is permitted. The hands may be washed again before bed, though the water cannot take everything. A grey shadow remains in the creases. The skin smells faintly of soap over rubber, which is better than rubber alone, but not quite free of it. You dry the hands on a towel that has seen this ritual before. You flex the fingers. They are stiff, but they open. The work is finished for now, and that phrase "for now" carries both relief and resignation. Outside, Akron quiets in layers. The busiest streets keep a low murmur. A streetcar passes with a softened bell. Somewhere, factory power continues for another shift, another department, another need, and the sound reaches the room only as a distant industrial breathing. The worker lies down while part of the city still works. That knowledge can feel lonely, or oddly reassuring, because the world has not stopped, but it has stepped back from him for a few hours. Sleep after physical work can be deep, but not always peaceful. An aching wrist may wake you. A cough from factory air may trouble the dark. Worry about money may sit beside the bed as quietly as a folded coat. Still, the body has ancient methods of taking rest where it can. Breath slows, shoulders loosen. The day's repeated circle unwinds by degrees, and the bench recedes until it is only a faint shape at the edge of dreaming. In the dream, perhaps the tire is larger than it should be, or the seam never quite ends, or the blade is missing, or the bell rings too early. Work dreams are common among people whose days repeat strongly because the mind continues sorting what the body has done. But dreams also soften things. The tire may become a wheel on a road, the road may become a river, and the dark circle may open into ordinary sleep. Before morning, there is a small country of rest that belongs to no foreman and no clock, even if the clock waits nearby. In that country, the worker is not trimming, counting, hurrying, or being watched. He is only a sleeping person in a room where the air is cooler than the plant and where the tools cannot ask anything of him. That simple fact is tender enough. For a few hours, the hands are his own again. Then, eventually, the light returns. It comes thinly through curtains, or around the edge of a shade, or under a door in a boarding house where someone else is already up. The body wakes with its catalogue of yesterday, but also with the small renewal that sleep has managed. The wrist still aches, but less fiercely. The shoulders are stiff, but movable. The hands close and open. The day begins assembling itself. Coffee, if there is coffee, smells almost ceremonial in the morning. Bread, porridge, eggs, or whatever the household can provide becomes fuel for another round of labor. The clothes are put on again. The lunch is packed. The coat is lifted. Outside, the air may be cold enough to make the lungs feel washed for a moment before the factory takes over again. You step into Akron's morning with other workers, each carrying a private version of the same reluctant readiness. The walk or ride back to the plant is a return, but it is also a continuation of a life built around returns. The same corner, the same gate, the same clock. The same smell approaching before the door is fully open. Repetition can be oppressive, yet it also creates familiarity so complete that the worker moves through it almost without needing directions. The path is worn into the day is worn into the person. At the bench, the tire waits. It is new, but not new. Its seam catches the light. Its surface holds the warmth of a process larger than any one worker. The knife is lifted, the hand settles around the handle with the tired confidence of someone who knows both the skill and the cost. You turn the tire slowly, find the raised line, and begin again. Not because the work is easy, but because this is the work in front of you. And in that beginning again, there is the whole quiet truth of the 1920s Akron tire mold trimmer. A worker hidden near the edge of a famous industry, making rough things smooth by inches, by pressure, by patience, and by the small endurance of one careful cut after another. The room smells of rubber and oil. The light falls across the bench. The scrap curls softly away from the blade. The day opens in a dark ring, and the hands, already remembering, guide it onward. The onward motion is not grand, and that may be why it holds so much truth, because most working days do not arrive as events, but as familiar rooms asking familiar things from tired bodies. You don't step into history when you enter the trimming room. You step into a place that smells like yesterday, sounds like yesterday, and expects tomorrow to come wearing the same boots. The tire on the bench is only one tire, and yet it carries the whole pressure of the system that placed it there. By the time your hands have worked through the first few pieces, the morning chill has left your sleeves, and the air begins to gather close around your face. The factory warmth is not the warmth of a kitchen or sunlit porch. It is the damp, used warmth of steam, bodies, cured rubber, and machines that have been running before you arrived. You breathe it, because there is nothing else to breathe. You take it in while your knife finds the seam, while your thumb follows behind, while the scrap curls into its little black nest. There is a particular dullness to black rubber under lamps, and you learn to read that dullness the way someone else might read handwriting. The slight shine of a raised edge tells you where to begin. The narrow shadow beside a seam tells you where the flash thickens. A rough vent nub catches the light like a pinhead, and your blade shaves it down before the hand has time to make a ceremony of the act. The work is made of such tiny recognitions, so many of them that a single hour can hold hundreds. At moments, you may feel almost annoyed by how much attention the small things require. The tire is not asking for art. The factory is not asking for beauty. Yet the difference between decent work and poor work hides in little ridges no wider than a thread. And so you lower your head again, because the black side wall will not explain itself from a distance. You bring it near. You turn it toward the light. You give it the kind of patience that no one watching the road will ever know was there. The molds that leave these marks are elsewhere in the plant, heavy and hot, and served by workers whose own jobs carry other discomforts. Still, you think of them when a seam is especially proud or uneven. You imagine the metal halves closing, the rubber pressed into every groove, the heat doing its slow chemical work, the trapped air escaping through vents that leave their little whiskers behind. The mold gives the tire its authority, but it also leaves you with the small untidiness of force. Pressure always leaves traces. Those traces are your daily company. Some are thin as paper and lift away with one easy draw of the blade. Some are thick and stubborn, requiring a little coaxing, a second pass, a change of angle, and a careful pause so the edge does not become a wound. Some appear near raised lettering where one careless slip would scar the company name itself. And there your hand slows with a respect that is more practical than reverent. The letters must remain clean. The trim must disappear. If a tire is still warm, it seems almost alive in the hands, not breathing, not moving, but holding heat in a way that answers your touch. If it is cooled, it is less yielding, and the blade works with a flatter sound. You come to prefer certain temperatures, certain surfaces, certain molds, though preferences matter only when the room happens to grant them. The tires arrive as they arrive. Your wishes do not change the cart. There are days when the bench feels crowded even before the pile grows high. The rag, the stone, the knife, the scrap, the tire, your forearms, your lunch pail tucked away, the edge of another man's work just beside yours, all occupy the same narrow world. You make room by habit. You nudge the scrap aside, you tuck the rag under the stone, you shift your stance so another worker can pass without brushing the blade hand. Factory grace is practical, and it lives in inches. The sound of sharpening becomes a small mercy in the morning. Steel on stone, a breath of oil. The blade brightening along its edge, though not polished in any decorative way. You test it with caution, never foolishly, and then return to the tire with a touch of relief as the knife slides more cleanly through the flash. A good edge reduces argument. In a place where so much resists you, even that small cooperation feels welcome. Yet no sharp blade stays sharp for long against a day of rubber. The work dulls everything it uses, slowly and without drama. It dulls the knife, darkens the rag, roughens the hands, and wears the bench into shallow scars. It even dulls the sense of smell until the air seems ordinary, though outside people would notice it at once. The plant teaches endurance partly by making discomfort familiar. Familiar does not mean harmless, but it does make the mind stop naming every irritation. When you lift your head, the room has shifted without seeming to move. The stack behind one bench is lower. Another cart has arrived. The light has climbed along the brick wall. A man who was talking earlier has gone silent, and someone near the aisle has begun tapping one boot softly while he works. We notice these things because they are the clocks beneath the clock, the small changes by which a long morning becomes less shapeless. The foreman passes again, and the room tightens by a fraction. You do not stop. You do not hurry so visibly that hurry becomes guilt. You simply keep the knife moving with the evenness that looks best from an aisle. There is a skill in appearing steady under observation, and you learn it quickly in a factory, where being watched can make the simplest motion feel exposed. The blade must not know you are nervous. He stops near a worker 2 benches down. A few words are exchanged, low enough that the machines swallow most of them. The worker nods. The foreman moves on. The room loosens again, not much, just enough for shoulders to lower and for someone to resume a sentence that had been waiting in the air. You return to the seam, but your body has recorded the visit. It always does. This is another part of why the job wears. The tire itself needs attention, but the room asks for attention too. You watch the blade, the stack, the foreman, the pace, the quality, the time, the way your wrist feels, the way the next tire looks, and the mood of the men around you. None of these demands is loud by itself. Together they make a constant low pressure, like weather pressing against the walls. Still, a good batch can carry you. When the seams are fine and the blades are sharp, the work becomes nearly fluid, and the bench seems to find a rhythm that includes you rather than fighting you. The tire turns, the strip lifts, the thumb confirms, the scrap falls, another tire comes. In those stretches, the job is not pleasant exactly, but it is orderly, and order can be restful even inside labor. You may find yourself breathing with the motion, in as the tire turns, out as the blade draws. A brief pause while the thumb passes over the edge. Then again, no one designed the work for calm. And perhaps no one in the office would think of it that way, but the body sometimes makes its own quiet from repetition. It uses rhythm as a small shelter. It survives by turning necessity into pattern. There are small interruptions that break the pattern without disturbing it completely. A blade slips from a bench and strikes the floor with a sound that makes several heads turn. A cartwheel catches on a board and must be shoved free. Someone asks for the stone. Someone needs a rag. Someone laughs at a remark you only half heard, and the laugh rolls gently down the row, losing its shape but not its warmth. Then the knives return to the rubber and the room folds back into work. By mid-morning, your hands have grown fully dark with the day. The black marks collect along the fingerprints, under the nails, and where the palm creases nearest the thumb. You wipe them, but wiping only spreads the darkness differently. The rag is no longer a cleaning tool, so much as a shared agreement that the effort will be made, even if it cannot fully succeed. Cleanliness here is temporary, and sometimes only symbolic. The tire itself must look cleaner than the person finishing it. That is one of those quiet ironies you may feel without naming. Your hands become rougher so the sidewall can be smooth. Your clothes take the dust so the product can leave presentable. Your body absorbs the strain that should not show in the finished object. In factory work, the neatness of things often depends on the disorder carried by people. And as the morning bends toward noon and the air grows heavier over the benches, we follow the trimmer into the middle stretch again, where hunger, heat, and repetition begin to braid themselves through every careful movement. Hunger arrives gradually for the AKRON tire mold trimmer, not as an empty shock, but as a slow inward knocking beneath the factory noise. At first, it is only a thought of coffee. Then it becomes a memory of bread, then the smell of another man's lunch pail, opened too early for a quick check, slips through the rubber air and reminds you that the body is keeping its own schedule. The tire still needs trimming. The stomach does not care. The lunch pail itself can become an object of comfort long before it is opened. It sits nearby with its handle folded down, metal dulled by use, carrying food wrapped in cloth or paper, and perhaps a tin cup if the habit is yours. You know what is inside, and knowing is almost enough for a while. A sandwich, an apple, cold potatoes, a little cake if home has been generous. In a long shift, ordinary food becomes a promise. The last hour before lunch can stretch strangely. The clock seems to move, but not in a way the body trusts. You finish a tire and expect the hands to say the time has advanced, yet the room remains stubbornly where it was. The bench receives another tire. The knife returns to the scene. The stomach tightens and then grows quiet, waiting because it has learned there is no use arguing before the bell. Heat gathers at the collar. You can feel damp cloth between the shoulder blades, and when a draft crosses the floor, it cools your ankles without easing your face. The factory gives discomfort unevenly. One part of the body sweats. Another stays chilled. One hand is warm from the tire. The other feels stiff from resting near the edge of the bench. You adjust and adjust again, and the adjustments become part of the work. A rough tire near noon feels almost personal, though of course it is not. The seam is thick, the sidewall a little awkward, the vent nubs crowded near the lettering, and each pass of the blade seems to reveal another small thing to fix. You take care because care is still required, but patience is thinner when hunger and fatigue sit beside it. This is when a worker's skill matters most. not because the task is noble, but because irritation must be kept from entering the hand. You can tell when the room shares that feeling. Conversation thins. Men glance toward the clock without turning their heads fully. The scrape of tools sounds sharper. Someone mutters after a stubborn cut, not loudly enough to invite comment, but loud enough for the nearest bench to understand. Everyone is still working. Everyone is also waiting. This double state fills the room like steam. When the bell finally releases the row, the change is immediate but not chaotic. You finish the motion you are in, put the knife down carefully, and straighten with a slow awareness of the spine. The body seems taller for a second, then older. Around you, men step away from benches, reach for pails, wash quickly, find places to sit or lean, and let their faces loosen from the concentration of trimming. It is a modest freedom, but real. Food is opened with practical hands. Paper unfolds, tin lids lift. Bread smells faintly of home, even if home is a boarding room or a crowded kitchen above a shop. The first bite brings the body back from the edge of machinery, and for a few minutes the mouth belongs to something other than dust and rubber. You chew slowly because there is no reason to rush the only portion of the day that does not ask for output. Talk changes during lunch. It becomes fuller, less broken by the need to watch a blade. Someone speaks of a brother looking for work. Someone describes a landlord with a failing stove. Someone mentions a ball game, a church supper, a child who has learned a new word, a street where mud swallowed a shoe, or a wife who says the factory smell has defeated another washing. The subjects are ordinary, and ordinary subjects can be restful. You may sit on an overturned crate, a low stool, or against a wall where the brick is cool through your shirt. The pail rests between your feet. The knife waits across the room. The tires are still visible, but they no longer command you for the length of the break. This distance matters. Even a few yards from the bench can feel like a small country with different laws. The factory does not become silent at lunch because not every process stops and not every worker eats at the same time. But the trimming room takes on a lower pitch. The absence of cutting makes the air seem wider. You hear pipes knocking, carts farther away, a whistle outside, and the muted city beyond the walls. Without the close attention of the blade, your senses open outward, noticing things the work had pushed aside. A man may close his eyes for a minute, not sleeping, just withdrawing. Another may read a few lines of newspaper, holding it carefully away from dirty hands. Another may mend a loose lace, rub his wrist, or stare at nothing in particular while chewing the last of his bread. Lunch is not only eating, it is repair, small and incomplete, but necessary enough that the body receives it gratefully. When the break shortens towards its end, a reluctance enters the room. It is gentle, but everyone feels it. Pails are closed, wrappings are folded or discarded, men brush crumbs from trousers and rise with quiet sounds that reveal stiff knees and backs. The bench waits with the patient indifference of objects. The tire you left before lunch is still there, no kinder and no crueler than before. Returning to the blade after food can be harder than beginning in the morning. The body has remembered rest and resents losing it. The hands feel briefly clumsy, as though lunch has washed away the exact angle of the work. But habit returns quickly. The knife settles, the tire turns, the raised flash appears, and you follow it because that is what the afternoon requires. The day resumes its dark, circular pace. And as the lunch hour folds back into labor and the afternoon light begins its slow change along the factory windows, we move with you into the second half of the shift, where the work becomes less about beginning and more about enduring well. Endurance for the Akron tire mold trimmer is not a heroic posture, but the plain decision to keep doing the next correct thing after the pleasure of starting has gone. You stand at the bench with a body that has already worked, and you ask it to remain accurate. Not strong in some broad imagined way. Accurate. The blade must still meet the rubber properly. The thumb must still read the seam. The eye must still notice what the tired mind would rather overlook. The afternoon tires may not differ much from the morning tires, but you do. Your forearm is more aware of itself. Your shoulders sit lower, your feet have begun to feel the floor through the soles. A small cut near one knuckle has grown tender after washing, drying, flexing, and brushing against rubber. None of this stops the work. It only colors it the way smoke colors light. A tire with good edges can feel almost like kindness now. The seam is slight, the vent nubs few, and the flash lifts away in one smooth strip that gathers on the bench without tearing. You appreciate such tires more deeply in the afternoon. They are not gifts exactly, because they are only behaving as the process should allow. But a worker can be grateful for anything that asks less of an already tired hand. Gratitude in factories often attaches to small mercies. A bad edge, by contrast, feels heavier than its size. You lean closer, turn the tire, try one angle, then another, and the rubber responds with uneven little tugs. The blade catches, you stop before it gouges, you sharpen, you return. The tire becomes a small argument between the process that made it and the hand asked to finish it. No one outside the bench may notice this argument, yet it can occupy the whole mind for several minutes. Afternoon is also when the factory's smell seems deepest. The morning nose had been fresh enough to notice it sharply, then dull enough to stop noticing, and now, as heat and fatigue gather, the smell returns in another way. It is less a scent than a weight. Rubber, sulfur, machine oil, damp cloth, and human tiredness mingle until breathing feels like part of the labor. You may step toward a door when permitted, just to taste air with a little more weather in it. A window opened high above can change the room by a fraction. Cool air slips in if the season allows, stirring dust and carrying some distant sound from the yard. Perhaps a wagon moves, perhaps a motor coughs, perhaps rain begins lightly against brick and glass. The outside world reaches the trimmer only in hints, but those hints can refresh the mind for a moment. A smell of rain through factory air is a powerful thing. The body develops bargains. Finish this batch, then stretch the fingers. Sharpen after 3 more. Stand straighter when the next cart arrives. Do not think about the final bell yet, because thinking of it too early makes the remaining hours grow taller. These bargains are private and shifting, but they help the day become bearable in pieces. You cannot carry the whole afternoon at once. You carry one tire. This is where routine becomes almost moral, not in a grand sermonizing way, but in the ordinary sense that good work depends on returning attention when attention strays. You notice a raised bit, you trim it. You notice a rough edge, you smooth it. You notice your hand pressing too hard and soften the pressure before the blade bites. Over and over, the job asks you to correct not only rubber, but yourself. A younger worker might fight the afternoon, trying to overpower fatigue with speed, and the tire usually shows the result. Older hands know better. They slow just enough to remain clean, because messy speed is often slower in the end. A scarred tire, a rejected piece, a cut finger, a dull blade forced too long, all cost more than a measured stroke. The factory may prize speed, but workers understand the hidden pace beneath speed, the pace that keeps trouble from multiplying. When conversation returns, it often comes softer than morning talk. Men are too tired for lively argument, but a low exchange can keep the room human. Someone asks whether the rain has started. Someone says his wife wants him to bring home thread. Someone wonders whether the streetcar will be crowded. Someone says nothing for an hour, then offers a perfectly timed remark that makes the nearest benches laugh without quite looking up. Laughter can be economical too. The tires move onward, and you may imagine them leaving the plant, though only briefly. Perhaps they are stacked in a warehouse, perhaps loaded for shipment, perhaps bound for dealers, garages, or assembly lines where cars wait for their own finishing touches. Each tire is destined for motion, but at your bench it is still, asking to be turned by hand. There is a patience in that stillness, and a demand. Your own motion remains small. A person watching from above might see only a slight rocking, a turning of black circles, a repeated bend of the arm, and might miss the concentration contained there. Much of work is invisible because it is too close to the body. The difference between pressure and touch, between attention and habit, between fatigue and failure, cannot be seen from far away. You must stand beside the bench to understand. By now, the scrap pile has grown again. It is soft-looking, but not soft in a clean way. A tangle of black curls, thin fins, shaved nubs, and dusty fragments. You sweep it together and feel pieces cling to the rag and fingers. Waste is the shadow of finishing. Every clean edge produces a little remainder, and the day leaves those remainders around you until they are gathered and removed. The product moves forward, the scraps stay behind. And as the afternoon deepens and the repeated cuts begin to blur into one another, we drift toward the finishing end of the shift, where the trimmer's attention grows quieter, slower, and more inward, like a lamp turned low but not yet out. The final hours of an Akron tire mold trimmer's day have a softened heaviness, as though every sound in the room has been wrapped in the same black rubber dust. The machines still run, but you hear them from farther away inside yourself. The voices still rise and fall, but they no longer invite much response. Your hands remain active, and in some ways more skillful than ever, because fatigue has stripped the motion down to what it needs. There is less wasted movement now. You don't fuss unless fussing is necessary. You turn the tire only as much as the seam requires. You sharpen without ceremony, wipe without thinking, and shift your weight before the back complains too loudly. The body has become practical through tiredness. It has no energy for display. It wants only to finish cleanly and reach the hour when the knife can rest. A late tire can seem to contain the whole day, especially if its seam is difficult. You look at it and feel the morning, lunch, afternoon heat, foreman's passing, dull blade, sore thumb, and all the tires before it gathered in one dark curve. That is not fair to the tire, but fatigue is not always fair. Still, you do the work. You cannot trim yesterday's seam or tomorrow's seam. You can only trim this one. Sometimes, in the late hour, a strange calm arrives. The wishing for the day to end becomes so constant that it fades into the background and the hands simply continue. The factory seems almost dreamlike, full of repeated shapes and softened edges. A tire rolls slightly on a bench and is caught. A lamp hums, a cart pauses. Someone whistles one low phrase, then stops. You cut away a final strip and watch it fall. The foreman may make a last pass, checking counts, quality, and whether the room is closing the day properly. His presence matters, but even he seems part of the ritual now. The workers are near the end, and the end has its own gravity. No one wants trouble. No one wants a spoiled piece. No one wants a lecture in the last stretch. The room holds itself together with a tired politeness. You think of the washwater. You think of air outside. You think of supper without yet picturing it clearly. You think of sitting down. These thoughts are not distractions so much as lanterns placed along the final path. The tire turns under your hands, and beyond it, another life waits, small but real. A chair, a cup, a door closing behind you. The chance to stop being useful for a little while. The last pieces of flash feel almost symbolic, though you would likely not say so. They are the day's final ragged edges, shaved away one by one, until the tire looks smooth enough to leave and the bench can be cleared. Your thumb follows the line. The surface passes, the tire goes onward. You put the knife down and feel, for the first time in hours, the absence of needing to hold it. When the bell sounds, the relief moves through you more slowly than the sound itself. At first it is only a permission, then the back straightens, then the fingers open, then the room shifts into departure, with tools put away, pails lifted, scraps swept, and men turning from workers back into walkers, riders, fathers, lodgers, husbands, sons, neighbors, or simply tired people going somewhere quieter. The factory changes names for them as they leave. You clear your bench because tomorrow deserves a clean beginning, even if tomorrow will be hard. The rag is shaken, the scraps are gathered, the stone is set where it will not be lost. The blade is wiped and placed aside with care. These actions have a gentle finality, and they are part of what separates work from disorder. A worker may have little control over the factory, but he can leave his own station ready. At the wash basin, the line of men is patient in the exhausted way of those who understand the same need. Water darkens quickly. Soap slips in rough hands. Sleeves are pushed higher. Knuckles are rubbed. A small cut stings and is held under the water anyway. Someone remarks that the dirt is working steadier than any man in the room, and a few tired smiles answer him. The joke is old before it is spoken, but it still serves. The mirror, if there is one, gives back a face marked by heat, dust, and concentration. You may not look long. Factory mirrors are not places for vanity. They are places to check whether the grime is less visible, whether a collar can be turned, whether one's face looks ordinary enough to meet the evening. The eyes may seem older at the end of a shift, then younger again after food and sleep. Work changes the face by the hour. Coats are taken from hooks. Hats settle onto hair flattened by the day. Lunch pails hang lighter than they did in the morning, though the arms that carry them are heavier. Men move toward the doors, and the factory releases them into an air that may be cold, wet, smoky, or clear, but is cherished simply because it is not the air above the benches. You breathe it in. You feel the difference at once. And as the tired line of workers leaves the plant and spreads into the streets of Akron, we follow one trimmer a little farther, through the ordinary evening that receives him, and slowly unwinds the work from his hands. The street outside the tire plant holds its own kind of fatigue, because so many workers enter it at once, each carrying the imprint of a different room. Some smell of rubber, like you do. Some carry oil more strongly. Some have dust at the cuffs, or streaks on the cheek, or eyes reddened by heat and air. The city gathers these traces without surprise. It has seen them before, and it will see them again tomorrow. You walk carefully at first, because after hours near the bench, the legs need a moment to remember longer motion. The ground feels uneven. The air feels wider. The shoulders loosen with each step away from the gate, and yet the wrist still holds its dull complaint. Around you, men speak more freely than they did inside, voices opening under the sky. A factory wall behind you can make the street feel almost like a field. If rain has fallen, the pavement shines under lamps, and the reflections tremble when boots pass through shallow water. Rubber workers step around puddles, laughing if someone fails and splashes too much, because little misfortunes after the shift are easier to forgive than little misfortunes before it. A streetcar bell rings ahead. Smoke rests above rooftops. Somewhere, a shop door opens and releases the smell of tobacco, coffee, or frying onions into the damp air. The trimmer may ride home pressed among other workers, or walk if the distance is kind and the fare is better saved. On a streetcar, the body sways with the rails, and the hand grips a strap or seat back with fingers that still feel the knife handle. Nobody has to explain the silence that falls among tired riders. It is not unfriendly. It is simply the sound of people traveling inward while traveling home. You watch Akron pass in pieces, brick storefronts, boarding house windows, a boy running along the curb, a woman carrying a parcel close against the rain, a motor car with tires like the ones your hands have helped finish, rolling past without ceremony, its driver thinking of errands or weather, rather than the benches where the edges were trimmed. The sight may stir no bitterness. It may only pass by another circle moving through the city. At home, the first act may be removing the work shoes. This ordinary relief can feel nearly luxurious. The feet, flattened by the day, meet the floor differently, and the body understands that it has crossed a boundary. Coat on a chair, hat on a peg, lunch pail on the table or by the door. The household receives these things as part of its evening order, just as the factory bench received the knife in the morning. The smell of supper helps restore the senses. Steam from a pot is gentler than steam from a pipe. Onion, broth, bread, coffee and coal smoke mingle in a way that belongs to living rather than production. You wash again if water is ready, rubbing the hands with slower care than at the plant, not to satisfy any foreman, but to feel more fully returned to yourself. Some darkness remains. It always does. A family may ask about the day, and the answer may be plain. Rough batch, long afternoon, foreman was around, knife kept dulling. Good lunch, though. Rain started late. These fragments are enough for the room to know the general shape of your hours. Not every burden needs a full account. The household has its own labors, and evening is often a place where people trade only what can be carried without breaking the quiet. If you live among boarders, the talk is different, more public and sometimes louder, but still held together by shared tiredness. Men compare plants, departments, wages, landlords, food, and rumors. Someone may have heard of better work elsewhere. Someone may be skeptical. Someone may say, every place has its own bad air and its own man watching the clock. The talk can sound resigned, but resignation is often only experienced speaking in a low voice. There are evenings when the trimmer goes out after supper because life is not made only of work and recovery. A picture show, a walk, a visit, a church meeting, a porch conversation, or a stop at a shop can return color to the day. The body may be tired, but the mind asks for something beyond the bench. You may give it a little if wages and strength allow. Pleasure in working life is often measured carefully and cherished without speeches. Other evenings, sleep begins to pull before the dishes are cleared. The chair grows deep, the room sounds soften. The hands rest open on the knees, finally not holding, not guiding, not bracing, not correcting. In such stillness, you might see the factory again behind closed eyes, but less sharply now. The bench recedes, the seams blur. The dark circles of tires become only circles, then shadows, then nothing that needs your attention. Rest is not a cure for the job, but it is the body's nightly negotiation with it. Sleep cannot erase the fact that tomorrow may repeat today, yet it can give the hands back enough strength to begin. It can lower the ache, it can soften irritation, it can return a little patience to the wrist and eye. Without rest, the job would take too much too quickly. With rest, it takes slowly, which is still taking, but survivable. And as the evening room dims and the worker's breathing grows deeper, we let the home fade gently around him, while the factory waits in the distance, quiet in some rooms, busy in others, holding the unfinished work of another day. The plant at night has a different character, even when parts of it continue running, because darkness outside the windows makes the lamps seem more alone. Benches not in use sit under shadows. Scraps that escape the broom lie curled beside table legs. A forgotten rag stiffens near a stone. The molds elsewhere hold warmth in their metal, and the air carries the layered smells of rubber, oil, steam, dust, and all the bodies that filled the rooms earlier. A factory after a shift is never empty, in the way a field is empty. It is full of potential motion. Carts stand ready to roll. Belts hang ready to move. Tools wait with the patience of objects that will be used again whether anyone is rested or not. The trimming bench, cleared at quitting time, seems almost calm now, but its calm is temporary. Morning will place hands, tires, and pressure back upon it. If we stand there in imagination, we can see the small dignity of readiness, the knife set aside, the bench wiped, the floor swept imperfectly but honestly, the work surface scarred, not ruined, by long use. The dark marks on the wood are records of effort, each cut and stain part of an unplanned archive. Not an archive of papers, but an archive of contact, where work has written itself into matter. The tire mold trimmer's name may not be kept there, but his touch is. So are the touches of others. One man leaned more heavily on the left side, another kept his stone nearer the edge, another nicked the same corner of the bench each time his blade slipped. Over years, a workbench gathers workers the way a river stone gathers polish, slowly, without choosing what to remember. It is a quiet witness. Outside, Akron's night lowers over roofs, tracks, yards, and narrow streets. The city does not become rural or still, but it softens enough for lamps to glow more gently and for footsteps to sound more distinct. Somewhere a worker coughs behind a curtain. Somewhere a child sleeps while a coat smelling of rubber hangs nearby. Somewhere a woman folds a shirt that will never come fully clean at the cuffs. Industry rests not only in factories, but in rooms. The finished tires rest too, stacked and waiting for the next stage of their journey. In storage, they become almost anonymous, dark rings among dark rings, each one carrying the same general form, but a different brief history under the knife. A slight ridge removed here, a vent nub shaved there, a seam smoothed by a careful thumb. The differences have been erased for the sake of uniformity, and yet the erasing was the work. By morning, those tires may move again, loaded, counted, shipped, or fitted, passing beyond the trimmer's reach. The worker who touched them may already be handling another batch by then. That is one of the strange facts of production. Objects and workers part quickly. The object enters the world. The worker returns to the process. The tire travels farther than the hand that finished it, but the hand remains part of its story. We can let that thought remain quiet. It does not need to become grand. A tire is a useful thing, And a trimmer is a worker doing a necessary task in a hard room for a wage. Yet when we slow down enough to notice the seam, the blade, the heat, the darkened fingers, and the walk home, the useful thing becomes fuller. It carries a world with it. It carries Akron's brick walls, Ohio mornings, factory bells, and the patience of hands. The reason it sucked to be a 1920s Akron tire mold trimmer is not only that the work was dirty, aching, and repetitive. It is that the job sat in the narrow space between human care and industrial appetite, asking a person to stay precise while the system asked for speed, asking him to erase flaws while erasing the evidence of his own effort. That kind of work can make a person proud and tired in the same breath. It can give wages and take ease. It can teach skill and hide the skill it teaches. Still, the worker was there. He stood in the warm rubber air. He held the knife. He read the seam. He made the cut. We can keep him there for a moment, not trapped, but remembered, with the factory dim around him and the tire turning slowly under his hands. The room is loud in memory, but our attention can be gentle. We can see the task without rushing past it. The blade moves once more, cleanly along the raised line. The black curl lifts, folds, and falls. The thumb follows, feeling for roughness, finding none. Another small edge has been made smooth enough for the road, and another trace of work has disappeared into usefulness. The bench remains. The lamp hums softly. The worker breathes, turns the tire, and continues, because the day is not done and the old rhythm still has room to carry him.